You mentioned that he's taking a role around educating and against radicalisation. I actually think that is a good thing. I think it is good to use the experiences of people who have themselves been down this track to counter radicalisation in other places. But I think we'd want to see a longer term commitment to that. We want to see that it really sticks. We want to see that the victims themselves, most importantly, are convinced by that. We're not there yet, but perhaps him playing a role specifically in education around these matters is more appropriate.
So a former neo-Nazi, backed by Kemi Badenoch to be a local council candidate, has announced that he will not stand. Joshua Bonehill-Paine has multiple convictions, including for harassing a former MP, Luciano Berger, who's Jewish. He insists he's been rehabilitated. He's turned to counter-extremism work in the past 8 years. And speaking to Times Radio this morning, the Tory former Cabinet Minister Michael Gove told Times Radio people can change.
This individual who committed some terrible, terrible crimes has not just repented, not just served his time and acknowledged his fault, but is now working to stop other young people going down the path that he went down. I think that the importance of contrition, forgiveness, rehabilitation and repentance is absolutely critical.
Michael Gove there. Now, Bonehill-Paine says he'll now become an advisor to the Conservative Party's Culture and Integration Commission. Let's get the views of Phil Rosenberg, the President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Hello to you.
Hello, John.
Hi, welcome to you. Tell me, you've seen the way the story has now developed with Bonehill-Paine now standing down as a possible candidate. What are your thoughts?
It had to be right that he could not stand as a candidate for the Conservative Party. It shouldn't have been where it was, but this is clearly better now. It's important that all parties do not give this kind of platform to people who have engaged in such terrible behaviour of any kind, including racism, including anti-Semitism, and listen to the victims of that abuse. And Luciano Berger's comments on this over the last couple of days have been harrowing, but important to listen to, and it's right that he will no longer be a candidate for the Conservative Party.
Okay, let me put this to you then, Phil, for your thoughts on the principle of repentance and rehabilitation. You heard it articulated there by Michael Gove. And this man's crimes were abhorrent. They were appalling. He served jail time for them, and now he's working actively, and has been for some time, we're told, against that kind of hate and prejudice, fighting radicalisation and so on. Is there room in your calculation of the argument, room for repentance and giving someone a second chance?
There's absolutely room for repentance and rehabilitation, and I think it's important that some of the things we're hearing about what he's doing are encouraging. But there's a difference between that rehabilitation and then giving that person a mandate as the representative of a major political party, whilst the victims are still in many ways suffering the consequences of those actions that were not just one action, but actions over a sustained period of time. I mean, Joshua Bonehill-Paine first came to our attention when he organised a far-right demonstration in Golders Green, in the heart of the Jewish community. So this is someone with a track record, and the idea that he would be serving communities, maybe diverse communities, dealing with people at very vulnerable times in their lives, whether it's housing, schools, and so on, as a local councillor, that seemed inappropriate. That's why we thought that was the wrong decision. We're glad that that's at least now been resolved. It had to be right that he would no longer be a candidate for the Conservative Party.
Right, so let me just continue to put the contrary case. I'm interested in all of your arguments. If you're talking about a man who was clearly, well, not simply a bigot, he was all that this man now admits that he was, and answered to the law for all of that, now says he's no longer that man, that he's working against those things that he espoused for all that time. What about the principle? It's a principle of democracy. In the end, people can judge whether he is the change man that he tells people that he is. If they do, they can vote for him. If he turns out to be something else, well, they can withdraw their support, because that's a principle of democracy. I mean, do please answer that point for me.
Political parties, I think, have a responsibility to set a tone and to decide what are the values that they want to represent in the country. And Conservative Party, I assume, does not want to give the impression that it is supportive of those kinds of views. Now, I'm not saying that's fair, but there was the risk that, given the severity of what he had done, given the fact that victims, including Luciano Berger, still felt deeply, deeply aggrieved, it was the wrong impression to give. Now, you mentioned that he's taking a role around educating and against radicalisation. I actually think that is a good thing. I think it is good to use the experiences of people who have themselves been down this track to counter radicalisation in other places. But I think we'd want to see a longer term commitment to that. We want to see that it really sticks. We want to see that the victims themselves, most importantly, are convinced by that. We're not there yet, but perhaps him playing a role specifically in education around these matters is more appropriate, certainly more appropriate than him standing as a local politician.
And so, would it be possible for this man to shake off the stigma and all the stain of his past conduct over time? That's possible, you say?
I think in principle it is possible. I mean, the most important judges of these things, of course, are the victims. And as we saw, the things that he targeted, not just Luciano Berger but others, vile, anti-Semitic and other forms of harassment, pornography, really disgusting stuff. That's, you can understand why some people think it's inappropriate. I think that they're the people that need to be convinced most about what level of rehabilitation a person has arrived at. But of course, we hope that people do learn and they do change. Right.
Now Kemi Badenoch, of course, she stood by this man, Bonehill-Paine, until the point that he stood down. Now, she also suggested that he might be fit to be a candidate for a local council, but not for Parliament. On both of those things, what are your thoughts on Kemi Badenoch's handling of this?
Well, I think in the end, the right decision has been made in the sense that he's no longer going to be a candidate, whatever was said previously. I think that the idea that it matters not so much to be a local councillor, I was a former local councillor. I know that there are many Conservative councillors around the country who might feel a bit disrespected, and indeed councillors all parties, because local councillors perform an important role listening to people, dealing with the things in their lives that sometimes are the most important things and sometimes most vulnerable, whether that's housing, school places, whether it's disputes between neighbours. It's not an unimportant role when you're considering whether someone has the kind of pastoral skills to treat all of their residents well and equally. It seemed that this was probably the wrong fit for someone with the track record of Mr. Bonehill-Paine.
Right, Phil Rosenberg, the President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, thank you. Now, I wonder what Alistair Graham thinks. He's a former chair of the Committee for Standards in Public Life. Alistair, welcome.
Good evening.
Alistair, what are your thoughts on all you've seen?
Well, it demonstrates a poor sense of judgment by Kemi Badenoch in supporting such a candidate with an appalling track record.
And is there any qualification to that? Do you believe that this man, Mr. Bonehill-Paine, should never have been contemplated for standing for a council on behalf of that party?
I do. I think he could never have been seriously considered as a credible candidate. I just cannot believe the people of Somerset, wherever they are, would have wanted to elect him into public office.
And what about the principle of rehabilitation? What about the idea of giving someone a second chance, Alistair?
Well, it depends what you mean by a second chance. Yes, he should have I'm totally in favour of people who've broken the law rehabilitating themselves. But in the end, public office is an important role. And for somebody to jump fairly quickly, having seen the light on a particular issue and having a dreadful track record, you just can't imagine that person can be credible candidate, perhaps in 10, 20 years' time, who knows?
All right.
I agree with what your previous speaker said, in terms there needs to be a longer period of time where he's demonstrated he's totally changed his thinking and behaviour.
Yeah. And is it not, in the end, a matter for electors to decide whether they want to put such a person or any other person in office or not?
Well, of course it is, and he can stand as an independent if he wants, if he's that keen to get into public office. But I think the issue people will think about is who did the leader of the opposition consult before she decided to support this individual for local candidacy? Did she talk to the victims? She doesn't seem to have spoken to the Jewish community about the depth of feeling about this particular individual. So I think there are some issues that arise from this, given that anti-Semitism is such a sensitive political issue for this country.
All right. Alistair Graham, former chairman of the Committee for Standards in Public Life, thank you for your views.